This is Hoosier Ag Today. I'm Andy Eubank with the latest Indiana farm news on the morning edition for the 15th of October 2015. Coming up in the news, it's all about the dry harvest. It's moving along quickly. What about the next few days? Will you continue to be able to get into those fields? Ryan Martin, our chief meteorologist, checks in. Gary Truitt says getting the crop out has not been a problem this year. He has a DuPont Pioneer Agronomy update. And Ryan checks back with the longer-term forecast coming up on the morning edition. We'll have a look back at yesterday's sell-off for corn, soybeans, and wheat, and analysis with Tom Fritz of EFG. It's all on the morning edition of Hoosier Ag Today.
Indiana Farm Bureau needs you. It's critical for your farm and family that your voice be heard daily. Farm Bureau membership tells legislators that Indiana agriculture stands together on property tax issues, farmland annexation, and water rules. Protect your livelihood and children's future by going online to infb.org/join or call 1-800-FARM-BUREAU. infb.org/join or call 1-800-FARM-BUREAU. Your membership brings value and benefits, but more importantly, it adds your voice to that of your neighbors and friends. Don't stand on the sidelines. Be heard on local, state, and national issues. We'll show you how. Indiana Farm Bureau needs you. Go to infb.org/join or call 1-800-FARM-BUREAU.
This is Hoosier Ag Today. I'm Andy Eubank with the latest news in Indiana agriculture. The news is brought to you by the DuPont Pioneer Agronomy Report, with timely reports from across the state during harvest each week on this station and at the agronomy page of HoosierAgToday.com. And we do have an agronomy update coming up shortly with Gary Truitt. Indiana harvest keeps rolling along as mostly sunny days continue across the state. Some farmers have already wrapped it up and others are getting close to completion. Hoosier Ag Today Chief Meteorologist Ryan Martin says it should be full speed ahead from now all the way through the weekend at least.
Well, for the most part, I think we're going to be able to truck right along with no major problems here right on through the end of the weekend. I do see a big weather change coming, but I don't think it has a lot that can stall harvest. The front, to me, looks like it wants to move through late Thursday night through early Friday. Very little moisture, if any at all, with it. The main thing we'll notice is a probably 15-degree drop in temperatures. It'll be a chilly weekend, but still, with as dry as our air mass is, I think harvest goes along just fine.
And for those guys that want to follow up harvest by getting into the fields and turn some of that soil, is there anybody anywhere in the state that's going to find some soil that's not compacted and dry as a bone?
It's going to take a little while. I tell you what, if you're wanting to work some dirt, the best thing that I can say is we got to look toward the middle, the second half of next week. I still look for a fairly promising front to try and move through in that time frame. Just how promising it is up in the air, I think bottom line, quarter to half, maybe 3/4 of an inch of moisture. Top end, if we see temperatures rise ahead of the front just right, maybe we can get an inch or more. But if you're running into compaction, if you got just bone dry, blow it away kind of soils, next week's your time frame to watch. If we don't get any there, we might be setting ourselves up for a pretty dry run into early November.
Get Martin's regular updates at HoosierAgToday.com and on the Apple Android mobile app. With the Indiana harvest at the halfway mark, it is safe to say it has been an easier harvest than had been expected. As we heard from Ryan Martin, no weather problems, and as Gary Truitt reports, getting the crop out has also not been a problem.
The dry fall weather has allowed the harvest to speed ahead. Ryan Peel, DuPont Pioneer agronomist in West Central Indiana, says farmers in his part of the state have passed the halfway mark.
Crawfordsville, south of there, they're very far along, well ahead of 50% along with harvest. And as you go on tracking north of there, it seems like there's still some areas that are probably farther along than 50%. And as you come east across the state, it slows down a little bit.
Corn yields remain quite variable, however. Some fields 260 bushels plus, while other fields much less.
Was riding in a combine yesterday with a guy, and he was very upbeat. We were showing some corn that was running about 120, and his farm average is going to be well above that. It's just tracking along, and as he got into his later plant of corn, it's not been near as good.
What has been a bit of a surprise is the way the crops have dried down so rapidly, and despite shallow roots and the lack of nitrogen, the crops are holding up in the field pretty well.
we definitely were set up to have a lot of issues. Unfortunately, we've never really had any storms that caused us any issues this year, and that's one thing that normally we have a few storms that will contribute to some stand loss.
Peel says the soybean harvest in west central Indiana is also rolling along at a very fast pace without any difficulties, and for the most part, the soybean yields are impressive.
40s in the earlier maturities, and I've heard 60s, 70s, and plus in the fuller season beans.
Listen to the complete report with Ryan Peel on the Agronomy page at our website and mobile app. I'm Gary Truitt.
Thanks, Gary. I'm Andy Eubank. This is Hoosier Ag Today, Indiana's Farm Network.
I'm Chief Meteorologist Ryan Martin with a look at Hoosier Ag Today's Indiana Farm Forecast from the Wells Fargo Forecast Center. A big change in air mass coming to the Hoosier State. Not so much today, but as we go through the night tonight and into tomorrow, we expect some colder air to push in from the north and west. What's really interesting to me on this is the fact that it's happening without a real significant cold front being analyzed coming through. As we take a look at the latest surface map, there's a cold front down meandering through the lower Mississippi Valley, but that's not a big one right now. But we definitely are seeing winds go more to the northwest as we go through the day today. They're going to start to howl. We've seen temperatures go into the lower 50s for highs up in the northern plains, so definitely a cooler air mass coming in. I think the change will lead to some patchy frost here as we go through later tomorrow night and into Saturday night. Not a big deal, but it's still there. And we're probably also not going to be seeing much in the way of precipitation. We've gone through the reasons why. We don't really need to rehash it again, but let's just put it this way. Spits and sprinkles is all I'm willing to say that we can get in most areas. If you just happen to be one of the lucky or, I guess, unlucky ones, depending on how you look at it, you might get up to 1/10 of an inch of precipitation. But most models now have backed off any significant moisture, and the reason is there's just none available to wring out. So we're going to be looking at cooler air, patchy frost, windy conditions here later this afternoon, and definitely through tomorrow. A big change, a big feel like fall. But as we go through the first part of next week, that's kind of going out the door. As a matter of fact, on the backside of this strong high, south and southwesterly winds are going to howl. I still think that's going to bump the temperatures up as we go from Monday into Tuesday and Wednesday, probably more for the Tuesday-Wednesday time frame than anything else. And then we're also going to have to see whether or not that leads to a bigger precipitation setup as we go through the late Wednesday, Thursday time frame of next week. I still think it's possible. I'm going to leave my rainfall totals alone. We left them alone for the past 24 hours, even though we saw the potential here. I guess I'm just not wanting to go over the top and call for heavy rains just yet. I'm going to go with 1/4 to 3/4 of an inch. Coverage should end up being about 80 to 90% of the state, the way this front's moving through. I'm just not ready to say there's super heavy rain. Following that, though, a nice dry forecast window. The models really haven't changed their thought process on that. I won't either. The big system that was trying to push into British Columbia out at the end of the 16-day window, yeah, it's not really holding on too well right now. So at this point, I guess I'm going to have to say we stay with the status quo, which is mostly inactive. Nice dry windows. I thought we'd see those windows go away, but so far our atmosphere has just been so dry, it's been difficult to build any kind of base where precipitation can work off of. So that's what we've got here so far. No real significant highlights or earth-shattering things to pay attention to. I'm Chief Meteorologist Ryan Martin on Hoosier Ag Today, Indiana's Farm Network.
This is Hoosier Ag Today and the Wednesday Farm Market Review. I'm Andy Eubank. A sell-off on Wednesday. The update is brought to you by Seed Consultants, simply the best value in the seed industry. 800-708-2676 online, seedconsultants.com. I checked in for analysis midday of a sell-off with Tom Fritz at EFG Group in Chicago. Wheat was down, corn was following, and at the time, soybeans, which did finish lower, were hanging in right around unchanged.
I agree with your assessment that the bean market is indeed holding. You've got bull spreads working in beans. The meal market just, modestly lower at about $1 lower. Bean oil is up 22. I think one thing that you have to pay attention to in the current time frame is crush margins. Crush margins for the fall are still over $1 a bushel. That's almost unheard of. So what that suggests to me is that we've got some pretty good demand for products. And when you've got the products leading the way higher, beans aren't going to, they're going to go along for the ride. We've seen a fair amount of Chinese business announced almost on a daily basis now. At least when they came back from Golden Week mid-late last week. So it looks like, granted our weekly export sales are lagging dramatically versus last year as well as the previous year. It seems like China's not so anxious to book forward as they have in previous years. But it looks like more they're just taking care of their spot needs as we move on. And I think that's why we're seeing announcements almost daily. Bean harvest, 62% done. As you go into the eastern Midwest, it's wrapping up, quickly. We're starting to see basis levels improve over in that area. But as you go further west, they still have a fair amount of harvesting yet to go. So, don't put the cart in front of the horse as far as buying beans, but it does appear that demand is improving. Cash bean sales, yesterday's rally caught some, but, I can't help but look at the spreads. Spreads still have a firm bias, so that tells me, this bean market's on some pretty good footing. Also, mid-August to just yesterday, beans have been in a trading range affair, and now we're sitting above that level we traded in for, 3 months. From a technical standpoint, that's pretty friendly. So I think the name of the game going forward is we're still buying breaks in soybeans as well as the product markets. Looking at corn has no mind of its own. It is strictly a follower. Yesterday, corn was up 4 cents, and I thought it was a monster struggle. Demand for U.S. corn, it's lacking, meaning especially from the export front. Still a lot of competition coming out of South America, as well as some minor competition coming out of the Ukraine. But, you look at the corn market, it's just spinning its wheels. Spreads continue to show decent amounts of carry, which furthers the idea that demand, it's just not there yet to make us a market.
Tom Fritz, he is with EFG Group in Chicago. Here is how the markets settled on Wednesday. $3.79 for December corn. It went down a nickel and a half, and March corn down 5 3/4 to $3.89 3/4. In the end, November beans 3 1/2 lower at $9.10 1/2, and January 9.14 1/4 off 4 cents, and December wheat 5.08 1/4 down a dime and 3/4. And now you're up to date with the markets, also the latest Indiana farm news and the Indiana farm forecast, with Ryan Martin being a big part of the show this morning. Thank you for listening to the Morning Edition. I'm Andy Eubank, back in the middle of today's trading day with an update on the grain markets and analysis. Mike Silver scheduled to join us from Kokomo Grain, and that's the midday edition after 11 o'clock Central, 12 noon Eastern Time today, right here, Hoosier Ag Today, Indiana's Farm Network. Have a great Thursday.